Okay, so that was good that earlier that Connor was up and got us started on some things that were, unpopular with younger kids with some of the language. Because I'm going to continue that because my kids are not very. What's the guy's name? Mr. Beast. My kids don't love Mr. Beast. Maybe there's like a generational thing or something. I mean, not that I'm a huge fan of him, but how many of you have watched Beast Games? Yeah, couple people. It's a very exciting show. My kids don't love that I've watched it, but it's this game show where people are playing for $5 million. And there's all these various challenges along the way that involve trust and greed and compromise and sacrifice and skill. And it's just like there's lots going on. The psychology of it is fascinating. And they're wearing down from like 1,000 people in the game to one person who wins it all. And so there's this one challenge that comes up. Where there's a group of about, I think it's about 100 people that are vying for limited seats on a helicopter to make it to the next set of challenges. And each person is given a coin. And they have to choose one person that they're going to give all the coins to. And that in giving the person their coins, that person gets to choose the 5 people that are going to go on the helicopter with them. If they can't give, like if 98% of the people can't trust one person with the coins, then the helicopter just flies off empty, and no one gets to go, and there's going to be 6 less people in the next challenge, and so everyone's got to give their coins to one person. So they say go, and most people, they flock to this one man, and this one man, the day before, he had given up $1 million, like $1 million real dollars, not like to allow everybody else to stay in the game. Like he could sell everybody out and receive $1 million and they would all be out of the game, or he could not take the $1 million and everyone would keep playing it. So he chose to let everybody to keep playing. And so everybody's like, yeah, this guy is trustworthy. Let's give him our coins. And so all these people are flocking to him to give him their coins. He's going to be the decider, except that some people held out. Some people had questions and reservations as to whether he was really worthy to receive the coins, whether he was really worthy the way that other people felt. And they had, all these different reasons. Some people wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to just pick his closest friends, that he would be wise in who he was choosing and not just show favoritism. Some people wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to pick all men, that it was important to them that he picked some women to go on the helicopter with him. Some people thought that he was just a little bit too religious and a little bit too weird. And so they're just like, no, like there's something about him I just can't trust, so I'm not going to give him my coin. And so here, like it comes down to the wire. He has so many coins, but does he have enough? And they're all at risk of falling short of the needed percentage because a bunch of people just wanted to make sure that if he was going to be leader, that he cared about the thing that they cared about most. Essentially saying, I'm not going to give you my coin, I'm not going to give you my trust unless I know that you already care about the things that I value most. Or further, I'm willing to lose out on this game. I'm losing to lose my life in this game, so to speak, if my priorities aren't your priorities. And on one hand, it's just a game. And for sure, this guy is fallible, and he can only pick 5 other people, and so people are guaranteed to be disappointed and unhappy. But there's a side of this picture and a side of this game that is a picture, I think, of our own lives trusting Jesus and only wanting to give him our coins and only wanting to give him our trust if we first know that he cares about the thing that we care about most. And this comes up in our text today that we're going to read, where there's this tension in the passage of those who are unwilling to give Jesus their trust versus a surprising person who did. And so let's read together. We're going to read Matthew 27, verses 35 to 54. And this is what it says. When they had crucified him, that is Jesus, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those who with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." There's a lot going on there, isn't there? Mockery, powerful, just powerful supernatural signs, and a confession of faith from an outsider. Our perspective on the cross today is from that of the centurion, the Roman centurion who stood guard and who heard or saw these things happen and then is somehow led to confess, surely this was the Son of God. And his perspective of the cross shows us how Jesus defeated death and how his defeating death frees us up to believe. But there's this tension that's going on in the scene between the bystanders and the chief priests and teachers versus the centurion. Because they all see the same thing going on. They're all there watching all this going on. But one group calls Jesus the Son of God in mockery, and the other says it in faith. One group wants to withhold their trust, like the coins in the game, while the other feels free to give them away. So what do they see, and why do their responses differ? Well, they see the 4 signs of power. the first that the whole land became dark at midday for 3 hours. That's a pretty big deal. How did it become dark for 3 hours? Some say that, perhaps it was an eclipse, except, that's an especially long eclipse in one place, right? So some then they say that maybe it was just dark, like it was dark clouds or something, right? That perhaps it was just really dark clouds, and maybe the Greek word for whole land that's translated here is normally translated whole earth. Maybe the whole earth became dark. That's a pretty big deal. If you're putting someone to death who's said to be the Son of God, and the whole world becomes dark while it's happening, that might be enough to start raising some questions for you. And then, in the moment when Jesus dies, when he gives up his life to God, there is the second thing, a rock-splitting earthquake. That at the death of Jesus, creation itself convulses. It's as if creation experiences the pain and loss of the one who created it. That in the earthquake and in the darkness, creation itself is reflecting the death of its creator. As the light of the world is snuffed out, it is fitting that the world would lose its light. That the earth would shake and rend at his death. There was a reaction in the cosmos and on the earth to the death of the Son of God. And in the moment of the shaking, there is also, thirdly, a tearing. That there was a veil in the temple in Jerusalem that separated people from the place called the Holy of Holies, which is the place where God's presence dwelt. And in the moment of Jesus' death, the temple veil, which is this like layered fabric that's 4 inches thick, and it was torn from top to bottom. No human could have done that. No human could have torn that, especially not top to bottom. But it was torn, and the veil separating God and people was broken at the death of Jesus. And if that isn't all amazing enough, Matthew says that, fourthly, that the tombs broke open and that the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. That's impressive. It also, he includes the note that they didn't leave their tombs until after the resurrection. So they waited 3 days. I don't know what they did there at the tombs for 3 days. Maybe they had a pack of cards to keep themselves busy. But still, that's incredible, right? It's this powerful sign that Jesus' death has defeated death. That it's not the resurrection that defeats death. That's a sign of its defeat. It's Jesus' death that defeats death, because by his death, he pays in full the debt of our sin for which we deserve death. And so the centurion, he sees these 4 powerful signs, or at least we don't quite know his vantage point, so we don't know how much. Some say, depending on where Golgotha was, maybe he saw some of these things. Maybe he heard about some of them later. It's hard to know. There's some debate over the exact location, but he's seen enough to have a reaction. He's seen enough of these signs that upon the death of Jesus, he's terrified, which I think is a normal response to seeing all these powerful and extraordinary signs at the death of Jesus. Because he's seen crucifixions before. He's a centurion in the Roman army. He's probably seen hundreds of crucifixions. He'd seen the brutality of death in this manner, and it's possible by this point that this is just an ordinary day for him, right? He's probably like jaded to the process at this point. But here, this time, he sees something out of the ordinary. He sees something that not only surprises him, but that terrifies him. He sees something that breaks him out of the jaded and ordinary brutality of the regular crucifixion regimen, and he's terrified. Something new has happened. Something surprising and powerful and different has happened. And so he's terrified, and he responds, surely this was the Son of God. He sees the power of God in Christ's death and acknowledges him as the Son of God. And Luke, in Luke's gospel, Luke says that he even praised God, that he's not just terrified, but that he praises God in this moment. But for the centurion to acknowledge him as the Son of God creates this juxtaposition with those who spoke earlier. Because his response is, as I've said before, it's a faithful reaction or a faithful statement of what was earlier said as a mockery. Because remember that earlier in the text, the bystanders and the chief priests had mocked Jesus with those same words. He trusts in God, they said. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, I am the Son of God. They said, come down from the cross and we will believe in him. And it's a remarkable contrast because they're all seeing the same scene. The chief priests and the teachers of the law are the ones who were supposed to know the Lord. They were experts on the Lord and experts on the law of the Lord. They were the ones who claimed to follow the Lord. But when they met the one who was the Son of God, they wanted to hold on to their coins. They wanted to refrain from putting their trust in him. They were like the people in Beast Games, willing to let the helicopter depart rather than give their trust to someone that they felt was unworthy. The bystanders watched Jesus die and mocked him and put conditions upon their trust in him, even as he was dying for them. Come down off the cross, then we'll believe. Show us power on our terms, then we'll believe. But then the Roman centurion watched him die and says the same words, but in faith and without condition. What we hold on to, I think, affects what we see. The bystanders wanted to hold on to their coins and to not give their trust to Jesus unless he prioritized the things that they prioritized. I'll only give it to him if he upholds the Sabbath in the way that I understand it. I'll only give it to him if he drives out the Romans the way that I expect him to. I'll only give it to him if he values the temple in the way that I do. I'll only give it to him if he proves himself by coming down off the cross. These are the values that they thought important. These are some of the things that they were holding on to. And it affects their ability to see Jesus for who he really is and to understand what is really happening in that moment. The chief priests and the teachers of the law held on to their reservations. They thought they knew what salvation was supposed to look like. That it looked like following all the rules just so. That it looked like having your life in order according to the law just so. If you had sin, then you make a sacrifice and you pay for it and you do better. And if you don't understand, then you work hard to know more so that you'll know more in the future. that salvation would come from trying harder and from doing better and from making the right sacrifices and from doing more. Just be better was the message. And I get that. When I read this story and I look at the centurion and I see his response of faith, I like to imagine that I would have responded the same way that he did. I want to imagine myself as a centurion in the story. But when I think through the teachers of the law and their perspective and my own heart, I am afraid that I would have been more likely to mock him than to confess. Salvation and freedom hasn't always come in the terms that I've believed for or longed for or understood. And so then I just want to put my head down and say, fine, I guess I'll do it myself. And I start to believe in my heart that maybe salvation is all up to me. Maybe it's all my own effort. That it just comes from doing better and from doing more and from trying harder. But Jesus exposes the falseness of this belief system. And this is what they couldn't see. In trusting God and giving himself up to death, Jesus shows us that salvation comes not through power, not through better control, but through surrender. Salvation doesn't come through harnessing our power better. It comes through giving ourselves to the only one with true power. Salvation and freedom doesn't come through better management of our lives, but through unconditional surrender to the Lord of love, to the one who gives life. And salvation doesn't come through the signs of power that occurred. It doesn't come through those 4 signs. Salvation comes through the faith-filled, unconditional surrender of Jesus giving himself up to death and committing himself to the hands of the Father. I don't know how those who mocked him interpreted those 4 signs of his death. I don't know how they would have explained these signs away, maybe in the same way that you and I try to rationalize these signs. But their response in Luke is telling. Luke says in verse 23-48 of the crucifixion, when the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. They all saw what the centurion saw, and they beat their breasts, maybe in anger, maybe in despair, and they went away. The centurion saw the signs, and he professed faith because he saw what they couldn't see. The faith and the surrender of Jesus. Into your hands I commit my spirit, Jesus said when he died. Jesus, the only one who is innocent of sin and of the need for death, surrendered and gave himself up to death. He didn't rage or grasp for power. He didn't rage at the injustice of it all at his death. He's the only one who rightly could have, but he didn't. With faith and humility, he entrusted himself to his Father in heaven, the one with true power. And this is what we need to see. And this is what the centurion saw. And he was a soldier. In so many ways, he wasn't that different than the teachers of the law. He knew all about the law and regimen and merited salvation and achievement. That's how it works in an army. And as a soldier and as a Roman, he'd seen all manner of men claiming to be a son of God, but who only exercised that by cruelty and by coercion. But here was one whose crucifixion was accompanied by real power, yet was met with mockery, but who still gave himself up in surrender and in faith into the hands of the only one with real power, even in the moment of his death. Now here must be the true Son of God. Ironically, the centurion likely had coins in his pocket or his money pouch, coins that would have depicted Caesar's face and that would have declared Caesar as a son of God or as a son of the gods. But upon experiencing Jesus at his death, the centurion gives his trust to Jesus. He gives his coin to Jesus, because surely here must be the Son of God. And it all brings up the question, what are your coins? And what are your conditions? What are the ways that you believe that it all depends on you? It can be frightening to let go of our conditions and to give our trust. I don't think that surrender is easy for most of us. Most of us have spent our whole lives and our education and our experience in society learning how to do it ourselves, learning to believe that it all depends on me. The reservations of the chief priests and the bystanders are familiar to us, I think. But if we hold on to our reservations, if we hold on to control, we'll miss seeing and experiencing all that Jesus has for us on the cross. We'll miss out on the freedom that he has for us. Better control won't set us free. Only surrender to Jesus will set us free. Worship team, make their way forward. A few years ago, when I was finished in youth ministry, I thought that I knew what my life was supposed to look like, and what path I had been called to, and that it was mine to simply work hard at it and to pursue. And so, you know, I was applying at churches across Canada. I applied at church after church after church, and I got rejection after rejection after rejection. And I had this friend who I discipled, and he kept asking if I would do a small group Bible study with him and with a few friends. But I thought I knew, you know, what I was supposed to do. I thought I knew the plan that I just had to work. And so I didn't want to start something that I couldn't follow through on for very long. And so I kept saying no. And I just kept chasing the thing that I thought that I was supposed to do. That I'll just try harder. I figured I'll just try harder. I'll just do more. I'll just keep working at it. But he kept asking, and I kept saying no, and he kept asking, and I kept saying no. Till finally the rejections had added up enough for me to say, well, I don't know if I can turn him down anymore. And so I said, well, fine. I suppose I could try. You know, I could try for a little bit. And that was a moment of like reluctant surrender for me. It was like I surrendered like just this much to something that maybe Jesus was inviting me into. And you know, it wasn't a particularly faith-filled yes, but it was the first step in acknowledging that maybe my way and maybe my reservations weren't the right way. But even with that little surrender, God said, great, I can work with that. And the things that he did and the things that I got to see and experience over the next few months were like nothing I'd seen before. But even then, Even then, I kept striving and trying to do things my own way, and I still kept applying in all these different places because I thought that there was something else I was supposed to be doing. I just had to work at it. And then one day, one of the new men in my life who was a part of this group called me. A lot of these guys were rough around the edges. I think this guy was even high at the time. And he said, "Hey, why do you keep applying at all these other places? What if God has called you to stay here and to be a pastor to people like me?" And I think that's when my heart surrendered. At least in that moment. There are lots of things to still work on. But that was a moment when I gave up control of one thing that I was holding on to. Where I finally said about something, "Lord, not my way, not my will, but your will be done." And so the centurion, he saw some incredible, powerful signs, and those things terrified him. But he also saw faith and surrender of the only crucifixion victim he ever met who was truly innocent. He saw what surrender and faith really looks like. Because yes, the cross is victory, and it's also surrender. Surrender to the one with true power to save. Surrender to the only one with true power to bring freedom. And so what are you holding on to that you don't want to surrender? What is the way that you're trying to just work it yourself instead of surrender to Jesus? How is Jesus inviting you to surrender to him today? We're gonna respond in worship, and then we're gonna have a time of communion. And I think that communion is an appropriate response, because communion is a reminder that we surrender. It's a reminder that it's not about what we do, but about what Jesus has done, that saves us, that changes us, that frees us. So I invite you to surrender to Jesus today. And if you've made a decision to follow Jesus, or if you haven't made a decision to follow Jesus, I'd invite you to let the communion elements, when they come around, to pass you by, and to reflect on what Jesus might be inviting you into. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for the example of the centurion who confesses you to truly be the Son of God. And Lord, you see in us all the reservations that we hold in our hearts and in our minds and in our lives. You see all the reservations that we hold from giving our trust to you, from giving our coins over to you. Would you reveal those things to us? Would you teach us to see you, to see who you are, and what you've done for us, and to understand that freedom and salvation comes not from doing better, but through